everybody. It's Joy and Scott from Anderson Injury Law. And today we're going to talk about different types of accidents. When we think about accidents, it's always a car accident is our first thought. But today we're going to talk about pedestrian accidents. And it's funny because last night my husband and I were going out for dinner, and this guy cross the street, not at a corner or anything, just crosses the street. It's dark. He's in a dark jacket. And I'm like, oh my God, look out for him. So when that type of thing happens, how does how do things work? People just walk across the street and they think that the driver can see it and avoid them. But how does it really work?
It comes down to reasonableness on the facts. And so what you're looking at is someone is in a crosswalk, they are walking and on the indicator saying that they are to walk, and then they get hit by a vehicle. That's the cleanest cut case you can have because the pedestrian absolutely has the right of way, and a vehicle that hits them is now going to be responsible for hitting that pedestrian. The flip side of that clear cut is what you're talking about of here's someone who is jaywalking, so they're crossing the street illegally, not at the corner and in a designated crosswalk area. They are wearing dark clothes that make them difficult to see. It's night, probably not in a well lit area. And so that becomes the flip of that, where that is the hardest to prove. A vehicle driver is responsible for the injuries of the pedestrian. Often those cases, jury is going to say the pedestrian is at fault or is a majority at fault. And Colorado is a fault state. What that basically means is someone who is injured has to prove that the other person was more than 50% at fault, or said another way, that the injured person is at least less than 50% at fault. Otherwise, they lose their case. A 50-50 finding is a loss. So if it's equally the driver's fault and equally the pedestrian's fault, that means the pedestrian lost their case. In a situation like you've described, my opinion is the pedestrian's probably 100% at fault, or very close to 100% at fault for crossing illegally in dark clothes, not looking for vehicles coming. That would be, in my opinion, a case that does not go very well for the pedestrian. There are some other facts that could go into it. If someone was driving their vehicle in a careless way, they're driving 60 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone, they're driving without their headlights on, they're on their cell phone, they're drunk. There's a lot of other facts that could go into it that could very much change that analysis. But at least from the basic idea of here's a guy in a dark, non-reflective suit or clothing at night, not well lit area, that pedestrian probably lost their case. And so you can go through a lot of variations. Pedestrian incidents are very fact intensive, as you can see just from trying to explain what happens. There are facts, there's a significant number of facts we have to talk about, but you can go through a lot of extremes. What happens when someone's in a crosswalk, but they're crossing on a red light and with the no walk symbol? There's a lot of situations. Someone started crossing when they had the right of way, but they moved so slowly they didn't actually cross the street by the time it turned red, and then traffic is coming. Though that last scenario is pretty easy as well. The pedestrian still has the right of way to get across the intersection, even if they started legally and didn't make it all the way across. Colorado has, and a lot of the cities have ordinances, but Colorado as a state has enacted a number of laws relating to crosswalks. And so as a pedestrian, for people watching, the simple answer is be in a crosswalk and you're in good shape. If you are not in a crosswalk, you are crossing, jaywalking illegally, you should expect there is going to be a fault assessment against the person who's jaywalking. You then have some more complicated ones with, hey, cars are lined up on the street and all parked, and 6-year-old kid runs out to get in the car, but runs out into the roadway enough to get hit by a vehicle. Those are usually very tragic cases, but ones where a driver usually doesn't have the ability to avoid that because the kid pops out with no warning, no ability to see them in a way where a driver can't reasonably expect a little kid to be popping out into the roadway. Again, there are some facts that can change that, but typically that is a tragic situation where there's no real source of recovery.
Yeah, that's
There's
heartbreaking.
there are a
Um,
number of cases of what happens when the pedestrian is drunk and they're stumbling along the road and they're not paying attention. Again, it becomes fact intensive, and often we're looking at the driver, because if someone is stumbling down the road but they're not doing anything inappropriate other than public intoxication, that's usually not something that is their fault if they then get hit, or versus a drunk person stumbling along the road and falls into the road and then gets hit. So pedestrian cases are very fact intensive.
and are there a lot of cases in this area? Because in Colorado, we're active and people like to walk. So, is there a lot of cases in this area?
Yes, yeah, pedestrians get hit a lot.
All right, and then I wanted to ask one follow up is you think about the pedestrian suing the driver, but does the driver sue the pedestrian?
It's possible. A car hitting a pedestrian often will lead to damage to the vehicle, can lead to injury of the driver of the vehicle. You usually don't expect that, but it would not be impossible or unheard of. It's just highly unlikely the driver of the vehicle is injured. But it is something that a driver, if the pedestrian has done something wrong, the driver could have a claim against the pedestrian. There are certainly situations of pedestrians who intentionally jump into the roadway to create problems. And that would be a situation where a driver is now suing a pedestrian for their wrongful acts.
It's funny because we always think as drivers that pedestrians, I don't want to say have the right of way. They do have the right of way in a crosswalk. That doesn't mean that they can walk wherever they want, whenever they want, however they want. And we've gotten into that mindset. Like the driver has to be a defensive driver all the time when the pedestrian has responsibilities too.
Yep. Yeah, the legal framework does not take into consideration the moral implication of if you're a driver and you hit someone, now having to say, oh, I hit this person, and living with the I just creamed someone with my car kind of guilt
Right?
goes with that. And so whether the pedestrian is in the right or wrong, the driver will usually have some kind of remorse that they then have to deal with of they hit somebody. And like I said, it could be the pedestrian was completely at fault. That's still something that most decent people will end up living with of, man, could I have done something different? Should I have done something different? Something like that. So
Awesome.
there,
Well, really good information to know because you do have some rights as a driver from people just coming out into the street or whatever. You know,
there's there's a jury instruction that says people have the right to believe other people will obey the law. And that's one of the things that when someone's jaywalking, that's why it makes it a easier argument to say a pedestrian is at fault, because people have a right to assume that others will obey the law, and jaywalking is
yeah,
illegal.
that's a good one. All right. If people want to get a hold of you, you provide free consultations, and your phone number is on the screen, and the website is
Injuryevaluation.com.
awesome. And then our next topic in this series is bike accidents. So stay tuned. All right. Take care.